Hi everyone, Rob O'Neill here, Inoshishibeya, Aylesbury Sumo. Today we're going to have a quick look at some mobility work specific for sumo. So what we're looking at is lower body mobility to allow us to get a deeper starting position and stay low while we're moving through those squatting positions off the tachi, but also staying low throughout the duration of a match. Now when we're looking at lower body mobility, particularly for squatting movements, the two joints that we're primarily looking at are the ankle and the hip. Most people who haven't undergone knee surgery should have sufficient knee mobility to adopt any kind of squatting position that they need to. For the majority of people, the limiting factors are going to be either their ankle mobility, and this is particularly the case for people who wear large built-up trainers or boots quite frequently, as well as high heels for women, and also that the other limiting factor is likely to be people's hip mobility, and this is often due to kind of long periods of sitting or very sedentary jobs. So what we're going to look at is a relatively broad spectrum approach, using a couple of different modalities to increase the mobility of the ankle and the hip. So we're going to look at not only kind of foam rolling, so self-myofascial release, but also assisted stretching with the use of bands, as well as static and dynamic stretches using just our own body weight. And we're going to look at the ankle first and then the hip. Now there are two important points to cover before we go into the meat of what we're going to look at. The first is the construction of your own body. So it is entirely possible that the way your body is constructed is going to limit the amount of mobility that you can attain. This is very commonly seen, for example, in Olympic weightlifters or ballet dancers, who essentially have to be built with the correct hip structure for those sports. It's something that's very, very difficult to reach an incredibly high level in if you're not actually born with the correct bone structure. That being said, most people nowadays can improve their mobility from where they are to a better position. So that's not to say not to work on it, it's just to say you may reach a point where you're naturally limited in the mobility that you can achieve. So the second and in fact more important point is safety. Now there is always an injury risk with whatever kind of training you undertake, and this includes with mobility and stretching. This is why when we look at these techniques, we're actually going to put static stretching at the end of the session. Undertaking static stretching with cold muscles does lead to an increased risk of kind of tearing or injury there. So we want to make sure we put those more intense static stretches at the end of the session once the muscle's already warmed up and can tolerate it. It's also important when we're using equipment such as bands, rollers or whatever, that we're using equipment that is properly made, properly maintained and of a high quality. And what we don't want is to use a piece of equipment and have it break on us, potentially causing injury while we're undertaking training. So for every modality that we use, we're going to try and keep the number of exercises to a minimum and do as little as possible to get the biggest result that we can. So when we're looking at foam rolling, we're going to look at three primary areas. So this is the calf to mobilise the ankle, and then the outer thigh and inner thigh to help mobilise the hip. Now very simply what we're going to do for the calf is place the back of the calf on the foam roller, put our weight through the calf and roll up and down until we find those tight areas, and those are where we're going to focus in on the rolling. Okay, so I'm going to put the demonstration video up now. We can have a look. It's very simple for the back of the calf. Now for the inner and outer thigh, again, same principle. Okay, we're just rolling, finding those tender spots, those knots, and working on those, and just taking the time to actually work those out. And we'll have some prescriptions for the amount of time at the end of the section. So next up, we're going to look at using bands for our mobility. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie off a band around a secure anchor point. So I'm using the power rack, but whatever you've got in your gym, tie it, make sure it's secure, make sure it's not going to move. We're then going to wrap it in an X position around the foot, so it's going to come across the top of the foot and around the back of the ankle. Okay, this is going to keep it nice and secure on our foot. So for the ankle, all we're doing is pulling our toes towards us against the resistance of that band. Okay, that's going to strengthen the front of the shin, the anterior tibialis. That's going to strengthen that muscle. It's also going to help lengthen and relax the calf muscles. For the hip, we're keeping that band in exactly the same position, and we're just going to shift away from our anchor point until we feel the pull in the hip. So we should feel the band pulling our leg away from us. Okay, and that's going to open up that hip capsule and really help mobilize that hip for us. So the next exercise that we're going to do, again looking at mobilizing those hips, is a wall touch drill. So what we're going to do here with a very light weight, I'm using a 3 kilo medicine ball, just to add a small amount of resistance. Start very, very close, maybe a fist's kind of width away from the wall with the heels. And what we're going to push those hips back and try and touch the wall without bending the knees or losing the balance. Okay, then each kind of 3 to 5 repetitions, you're going to move very slightly forward, again maybe an inch, maybe 2 inches. Repeat the same drill until you start to feel that stretch down the hamstrings. Initially you may not feel anything at all, and that's absolutely fine. You're going to start warming the hamstrings up for when you are far enough to the wall to actually feel that deep stretch down the hamstrings. Make sure you perform this under control, don't fall backwards out of it, okay? Pushing the hips back until you gently touch the wall and standing back up to straight. Okay? When you're just starting out, you can do these unweighted, and as you begin to progress with this, you can increase the weight to kind of develop this stretch as you go. So the next exercise is going to work on both the hip and the ankle. It's a very low intensity dynamic movement to start mobilizing the hip and the ankle. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to adopt this 6-point position, so our knees, balls of the feet and hands are on the ground, and all we're going to do is rock back over the hips, okay, pushing the back side towards the heels. It's important in this position not to round the back. We want to keep a nice flat back, push back against the hips, push the hips towards the ankles. This is going to start to mobilize the hip joint, start to mobilize the ankle joint, stretch out both the calf muscles as well as the hamstrings as we adopt that deep kind of almost squat position on the ground. And that's going to lead in nicely to the slightly more intense stretching exercises we're going to do in a second. So while this next exercise will help stretch the hamstrings slightly, we're primarily focused on the calf muscle here. So what we're going to do is we're going to adopt as deep a squat position as we can. Hopefully we're nicely warmed up from the 6-point position to adopt a slightly deeper squat than we would have cold. And all we're going to do from here is rock over one foot and then the other, feeling the stretch in the back of the calf, okay, and pushing to the end range of motion, to where we just start to feel that discomfort, feel that stretch. And we're just going to rock each side, maybe hold for a couple of seconds on each side, okay, feeling that stretch through the back of the ankle. Okay, and what we can do to regress this ankle exercise is start in a long lunge position. So rather than in a deep squat, we've got one knee on the ground, the opposite foot on the ground. I'm just going to rock forward over that front foot. Again, feel the stretch, feel the slight discomfort in the calf, so that we know we're working, really stretching that calf, and then we can build up to the more balance and more mobility demanding full squat version. And the next exercise is for hip mobility. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to start seated on the floor, so backside and feet in contact with the floor, and all we're going to do is drop both our knees to one side. So one knee is going to go to the opposite side ankle, and the other knee is going to go to the floor, and we're trying to keep the body nice and upright here, okay, trying to keep that good posture, and that's going to really deepen the stretch around the hip. What we can do to regress this exercise, if we're struggling from this position, is lean back slightly, support our weight with our hands. Okay, that's going to reduce the mobility requirement, and we can start building up to the full exercise at a more gentle pace. Next up, we're going to look at a static step stretch for the calf. So this is a static hold stretch. So this is something that you want to put further towards the end of your mobility session, or at the end of an actual training session when your muscles are warm and that forced stretch of the muscle isn't going to cause injury. All we're doing here is I'm using an aerobic stepper, but you can use anything that you have available, including a step in your house that's kind of 4 to 8 inches off the ground. All we're doing here is standing with the ball of the foot on the step, stepping the other foot off and letting that heel drop and letting our weight drop through that heel. And that's a static stretch for the calf to really help mobilise that ankle.